People think nurses see everything and nothing surprises us anymore. But I can tell you there's a difference between watching someone die from cancer and watching your own reflection disappear from every mirror in your house. And I have photos to prove what happened to me isn't some psychological breakdown. My name is Megan Torres, I'm 31 years old, and I work as a surgical nurse at Dallas Presbyterian Hospital in Texas, where I've spent the last 8 years assisting in everything from heart transplants to emergency trauma, and until 18 months ago, I was the most rational, skeptical person you could imagine. I grew up the daughter of 2 engineers who taught me that everything has a logical explanation, that science and evidence are all that matter in this world. So when my coworker Jennifer started talking about seeing strange lights over her apartment building, I just rolled my eyes and changed the subject. I had this distinctive scar on my left temple from a childhood accident where I fell off my bike and needed 12 stitches, a thin white line that curved from my hairline down toward my ear that people always noticed and asked about, and I never thought twice about it until the night it started glowing. Dr. Hoffman was the attending surgeon that shift, and I was assisting him with an emergency appendectomy when around 2 in the morning, I felt this strange warmth spreading across the left side of my face like someone was holding a heating pad against my skin. The warmth in my scar kept intensifying throughout the rest of our shift while we worked on this young college student whose appendix had ruptured. And by the time we finished the emergency surgery around 6 in the morning, my temple felt like it was on fire, but I managed to get through the procedure without Dr. Hoffman noticing anything wrong. I was exhausted after 12 hours of back-to-back surgeries, so I headed straight to the staff locker room to change out of my scrubs and get home. But the moment I stepped into that empty fluorescent lit space, the burning sensation exploded across the entire left side of my face like someone had pressed a branding iron against my skull. The nausea hit me so hard I doubled over the bench, that sick, dizzy feeling you get right before you pass out except multiplied by 1,000. While my vision started tunneling and this bone-deep humming sound filled my head like a drill boring into my brain. I tried to call out for help, but my voice came out as barely a whisper, and when I looked up at the mirrors above the sinks, I saw my scar glowing with this faint bluish light that definitely wasn't a hallucination because I could see it reflecting off the glass. The fluorescent light started dimming and brightening in a strange pattern while that humming got so loud I thought my eardrums might burst. And then the room began spinning around me until I collapsed on the cold tile floor and everything went black. I came to completely naked and restrained on something that felt alive beneath me, warm and pulsing like skin but harder than any material I'd ever touched, while blinding white light poured down from somewhere above, making it impossible to see anything beyond the edges of this table or platform or whatever they had me strapped to. The restraints weren't metal or leather, but something organic that seemed to grow tighter the more I struggled against them, and when I tried to scream, nothing came out except this pathetic whimpering sound that made me realize how completely helpless I was. They emerged from the shadows like nightmares given form, impossibly tall figures with gray skin that looked wet and diseased. Their heads too large for their skeletal frames, topped with huge black eyes that reflected nothing while they moved with surgical precision around my exposed body. One of them approached with an instrument that looked like a living telescope, all flowing organic curves and pulsing veins, and when it made contact with my temple scar, the pain was indescribable, like having my skull cracked open while acid poured directly into my brain. I could feel them doing things to the scar tissue, cutting and probing and inserting things that burned like molten metal while I thrashed against the restraints until my wrists and ankles bled from the struggle. They worked in complete silence, but I could sense communication passing between them. Not words, but something deeper and more invasive than speech. And when one of them leaned over my face, I saw my own terror reflected in those dead black eyes, like looking into twin pools of oil. The procedure seemed to last for hours while they violated every part of my body with their instruments, taking samples and measurements while I begged them to stop through tears and broken sobs. And just when I thought I might die from the pain, everything went white and I felt myself falling through space toward darkness. I woke up on the cold tile floor of the locker room at 11:30 a.m. with over 4 hours completely erased from my memory and blood crusted under my fingernails that I couldn't remember getting there. My entire body ached like I'd been beaten with hammers, every muscle screaming in pain while my temple throbbed with a deep burning sensation that made me want to claw at my own skin. When I tried to stand, my legs gave out twice before I could get upright, and I realized my scrubs were torn in places I didn't remember tearing them, small rips around the neckline and sleeves like something had grabbed me and yanked me around. The taste in my mouth was horrible, like I'd been sucking on pennies mixed with battery acid, and when I looked in the mirror above the sinks, I almost screamed because my scar was bright red and inflamed like someone had been cutting into it with a scalpel. Around my wrists and ankles were these perfect circular marks that looked exactly like restraint burns, and my eyes were bloodshot with tiny burst vessels that definitely hadn't been there when my shift ended. I stumbled to my car in complete terror, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition, and drove home in a daze while trying to convince myself I'd had some kind of seizure or mental breakdown that explained the missing time and physical trauma. For the next 3 weeks, I felt like I was dying slowly from the inside out, my body completely shutting down in ways no medical training could explain. My sense of taste disappeared completely, making everything I ate feel like chewing cardboard, and I lost 15 pounds because food made me so nauseous I could barely keep anything down for more than an hour. The headaches were constant and brutal, like someone was driving railroad spikes through my skull every few minutes, while my scar burned with this deep throbbing pain that no amount of ibuprofen could touch. Sleep became impossible because every time I closed my eyes I saw flashes of those gray faces and coal black eyes staring down at me. And when I finally did drift off, I'd wake up screaming from nightmares that felt more like recovered memories than dreams. I called in sick for 5 straight days, which was completely unlike me since I'd never missed more than a day of work in 8 years. But I couldn't function around other people when I was jumping at every sound and flinching whenever someone got too close. Dr. Mueller at the urgent care clinic ran every test he could think of, including blood work and CT scans, convinced I had some kind of infection or neurological disorder, but everything came back normal, except for these strange protein markers in my blood that he'd never seen before. He prescribed antibiotics and painkillers, but nothing helped. And when I mentioned the nightmares about medical procedures, he referred me to a psychiatrist, thinking I was having some kind of work-related trauma response. 6 months later, I thought I was finally getting my life back together. The nightmares had stopped and my scar was healing when I decided to take a hot bath after a particularly brutal shift in the trauma unit. I was soaking in the tub around midnight when that familiar burning sensation started creeping across my temple, and this time I knew exactly what it meant, so I tried to get out of the water, but my muscles locked up completely, leaving me trapped and helpless while the pain intensified. The bathroom lights started flickering in that same strange pattern I remembered from the locker room, while this nauseating dizziness washed over me like being injected with anesthesia, and then the ceiling above me began to glow with that cold blue light that made my skin crawl with terror. I managed to scream once before everything went white and I felt myself being pulled upward through the ceiling as if it didn't exist, my wet naked body floating through space while that horrible humming sound filled my head until I thought my brain might explode. They had me strapped to the same warm pulsing surface, but this time there were more of them. At least 6 of those tall gray figures working around me with instruments that looked like torture devices designed by aliens who understood pain better than any human ever could. The one nearest my head inserted something long and thin directly into my scar, while I screamed until my throat was raw, and I could feel it threading through my skull like a wire being pushed through soft cheese, while my entire nervous system lit up with agony. They were harvesting something from inside my head. I could sense fluid being drawn out through tubes while my vision went in and out of focus, and when they finished with my brain, they moved down to other parts of my body with devices that violated me in ways I can't even describe. One of them leaned over my face and those dead black eyes stared into mine while information flooded my brain like molten metal being poured into my skull. Concepts about tracking and monitoring and modification programs that made me understand with crystal clarity that I wasn't human to them. Just a test subject being prepared for something worse. The pain became so intense I finally passed out, but not before I heard one of them communicate something that translated in my mind as specimen ready for enhancement phase. I woke up in my bathtub 3 hours later with the water ice cold and my scar completely changed. The thin white line now wider and darker, like someone had reopened the old wound and let it heal wrong. But the weirdest thing was that I felt amazing. Better than I had in months, like every cell in my body had been recharged with new energy that made me want to run marathons and climb mountains. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked different too, my eyes brighter and my skin almost glowing with health, and when I touched the new scar tissue it felt warm and slightly raised like something was embedded underneath. The next day, Dr. Hoffman pulled me aside after surgery and asked if I'd been taking performance-enhancing drugs because my surgical precision had become almost supernatural, my hands moving with accuracy he'd never seen in 20 years of medicine. I laughed it off but knew he was right. I could anticipate his every move during operations, and my reflexes were so sharp I caught falling instruments before they hit the ground, almost like I could see a few seconds into the future. 2 weeks later, I started hearing things, not voices, but this constant low-frequency humming that seemed to come from electronic devices around me, and I realized I could somehow sense when my phone was about to ring or when traffic lights were going to change. Dr. Kepler from the psychiatry department cornered me in the cafeteria and said other staff members had mentioned I seemed different, more focused but also distant, like I wasn't entirely present anymore. He recommended I take some time off and get evaluated because unusual behavioral changes after head trauma could indicate serious neurological damage, but I knew it wasn't brain damage causing these abilities. It was whatever they had implanted in my scar during that second procedure, some kind of technology that was changing me from the inside out. That night, I called my mother in complete panic asking about my scar. When exactly it appeared because I was starting to think it wasn't from a bike accident like she'd always told me. Mom was quiet for a long time before admitting she'd lied to protect me, that the scar had appeared when I was 12 at summer camp in East Texas, and she'd never told me the real story because it was too frightening. The camp counselors had found me unconscious in the woods with a fresh head wound, no memory of how I got there or what happened, and when they asked the other kids, nobody had seen me leave my cabin during the night. The camp director wanted to call police thinking someone had attacked me, but I kept insisting I was fine and didn't remember anything, so they just treated the wound and sent me home early. Mom said I'd had nightmares for months afterward, but eventually seemed to forget about the whole incident, so they never brought it up again. I pressed her for more details, and she reluctantly gave me the phone number for Leslie Thompson, my bunkmate from that camp, who might remember more than I did. And when I called Leslie, she got very quiet before saying she'd always wondered if I would ever ask about that night. She told me I'd gotten up around 3 a.m. and walked out of the cabin like I was sleepwalking. And when she tried to follow me, something bright flashed in the woods, and she found me lying unconscious with the scar already healed on my temple. Leslie said she'd tried to wake me, but I was completely unresponsive. So she ran back to get the counselors who carried me to the infirmary. The next weekend, I drove to my mother's house to look through old photo albums, trying to find pictures from before the camp incident, when I discovered something that made my stomach drop. In a family reunion photo from 2 years earlier, I spotted my great-aunt Anna in the background, and she had what looked like an identical scar on her left temple in the exact same position as mine. Mom said Anna lived alone in Tyler, about 2 hours away, and had always been the strange one in the family, never married and rarely spoke to anyone, but she still had her address from Christmas cards. I decided I had to meet Anna because maybe she could help me understand what was really happening to me, and why we both seemed to have mysterious identical scars that appeared under impossible circumstances. But they didn't let me reach Anna peacefully. Damn it, it seems like my life will never be calm and normal like it used to be. I left Dallas early Saturday morning with a full tank of gas and Anna's address programmed into my GPS, hoping that meeting my great-aunt would finally give me the answers I desperately needed about what was happening to me. The first hour and a half went normally, steady traffic heading out of the city and past suburban development stretching toward Tyler while I rehearsed what I would say to a relative I'd never met, but everything changed when I was about 10 miles from Tyler. My radio started crackling with static interference that got louder and more aggressive until it sounded like someone was screaming through the speakers, and then my engine began sputtering like it was running out of fuel, even though my gauge showed 3/4 full. I pulled over to the shoulder just as my car died completely, all the dashboard lights flickering once before going dark, and I sat there in complete silence trying to figure out what the hell had just happened to my perfectly maintained Honda. That's when the radio came back to life with a sound that made every hair on my body stand up. This horrible metallic voice that didn't sound remotely human saying, "Return home," over and over again until I yanked the keys out of the ignition to make it stop. I was sitting there shaking and trying to call roadside assistance when this pickup truck pulled up behind me, and out stepped this really attractive guy in his 30s with kind eyes who immediately asked if I needed help. His name was Jake Cooper, and he was heading into Tyler to visit his sister. Said he'd noticed I was stranded on the side of the road and wanted to make sure I was okay, and when I explained what happened, he offered to tow me the rest of the way into town. We spent the next 20 minutes hooking up the tow strap while making small talk about weekend plans and how unreliable modern cars could be. and I found myself genuinely laughing for the first time in weeks as he told me funny stories about his family. He was charming in that down-to-earth way that made me forget about alien abductions and mysterious scars for a few precious minutes, and when he dropped me off at Anna's address, we exchanged phone numbers with promises to grab dinner sometime soon. Anna opened the door and immediately stared at my temple with recognition that made my stomach drop. She was tiny, maybe 80 years old, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and I noticed her left temple was completely smooth without any trace of a scar. "You're Patricia's granddaughter," she said before I could introduce myself, then stepped aside to let me in without another word. I mumbled something about being in the area and wanting to meet family, feeling like an idiot because clearly she knew exactly why I was there. She made tea in silence while I sat on her worn couch surrounded by old family photos. And when she returned with 2 steaming cups, we just stared at each other across her coffee table. The silence stretched for maybe 30 seconds before Anna leaned forward and pointed directly at my scar. "How long have you been having the dreams?" she asked in a voice that cut through all my prepared excuses and polite conversation. "The ones with the gray faces and the bright lights, where you wake up screaming and can't remember what they did to you?" I almost dropped my teacup because those words described exactly what had been happening to me for months, and I realized Anna knew everything about what these creatures were doing to our family. "Since I was 12, I whispered, my voice shaking because nobody had ever described my nightmares so perfectly before. Anna nodded like she'd been expecting that answer and rolled up her sleeve to show me her forearm, where I could see faded circular scars and perfect patterns around what looked like injection sites. "They took me first in 1945 when I was 18, right after the war ended," she said matter-of-factly, like she was discussing the weather instead of alien abduction. "Back then, nobody talked about such things. You'd be locked up in an asylum if you mentioned gray creatures with big black eyes, so I kept my mouth shut for 70 years. She stood up and walked to an old wooden chest in the corner, pulling out a shoebox filled with dozens of black and white photographs that she spread across the coffee table. Every single picture showed the same thing, that distinctive scar on her left temple in the exact same position as mine, documenting years and years of what looked like fresh injuries that healed and reopened in cycles. They came back every few years to monitor whatever they put inside us, studying how our bodies changed over time," Anna explained while pointing to different photos from different decades showing her scar at various stages of healing. "The mark disappeared when I turned 75, when they finally removed what I call the chip and were finished studying my aging process." I felt sick hearing those words because I understood she was describing some kind of long-term scientific experiment. Anna grabbed my hands across the table and squeezed them tight while staring directly into my eyes. "They're not trying to hurt us, Megan. They're trying to prepare humanity for something, studying how to modify our biology so we can survive what's coming. And I think I know what it is because they showed me the same visions they're probably showing you." "What visions?" I asked. But even as the words left my mouth, I started remembering flashes of images I'd been trying to ignore. Scenes of Earth that looked completely wrong somehow. The old television in Anna's living room suddenly flickered to life, even though neither of us had touched the remote, static crackling across the screen before settling on some mindless soap opera. Anna immediately stood up and unplugged it from the wall, with practiced efficiency. "They do that when we start talking too much," she said grimly, sitting back down across from me. "They don't like it when people like us meet each other, when we start comparing experiences and figuring out the pattern because they're afraid we'll cause mass panic before they're ready." I felt a chill run down my spine because I knew exactly what visions she meant now. Those horrible dreams I'd been having about Earth's future where everything was dead and barren. "The wasteland," I whispered, and Anna's eyes widened with recognition. "You've seen it too, haven't you? The planet with no rivers, no forests, no animals anywhere, just endless stretches of cracked earth under a burning sky." Anna nodded slowly while pulling out one more photograph, this one showing dozens of people in what looked like a medical facility, all with temple scars like ours. "They're trying to figure out which genetic combinations can survive in that environment," she explained quietly. "Most of the test subjects develop cancer within a few years because their bodies reject the modifications, but some of us are compatible with whatever they're trying to create." I stared at the photograph, feeling sick because I recognized some of the faces from my own dreams. People I'd never met in real life but had seen standing in that dead landscape waiting for something to happen.